Now I invite Dr. Paulette Mehta to come forward and light the chalice with me and lead us in our affirmation of covenant.
We light the chalice today with these words. May the light of the chalice give light and warmth to our community. When we are joyful and when we despair, may we feel the warmth spread from our circle to wider and wider circles until all know they belong to the one circle of life. We will now read the affirmation of covenant, which is in your pamphlet. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
And now I am happy to present our speaker for today, Dr. J. Mehta. He's a distinguished professor of medicine, physiology, and biophysics at the Stebbins and the Stebbins Chair in Cardiology at UAMS. He and his wife, Paulette, are longtime members of Unitarian Universalist congregations. They have generously supported the remodeling of the Mehta Wing in our church building. Dr. Mehta is the author and co-author of over 1,300 research papers, abstracts, and book chapters. His most recent book is entitled Heart Disease. It's all in your head and what you can do about it. Let's welcome Dr. Mehta.
Good morning. Isn't it a wonderful day with music and meditation? I'm very happy. I hope you're all happy. So I am going to talk this morning about how stress leads to heart disease and adverse outcome after a heart attack. Actually, the message is depicted on the front page of the program. I have done much research on this topic and written a book, as Margaret said, and will be available today after the service. Let me start with my own story growing up very poor in India as a refugee. I would wake up with 10 other children, one atop the other, like canned sardines. We would wash ourselves with water provided by our mothers, which was usually not very clean. We would eat from the same plate, very small amount of food, seldom had eggs or cheese or meat. Elders got a little more. And then we went out to play our favorite games in the back alleys. My father and grandfather would earn small amount of money, and mother and grandmother would take care of the children and wash and clean. Everyone had a role to play to make sure the others were okay. There was a neighborhood and a village. We all felt safe and had hopes for the future. We never heard of anyone having a heart attack or diabetes or high blood pressure. When I left India for the United States to pursue an advanced career in medicine, I lost this way of life and began to focus on self. I had to take care of myself with no family or friends around, with folks who looked different, had different foods, and had different values with a focus on self. I became very accomplished. UAMS honored me with distinguished professorship. I was ranked among the top 0.05% of all scientists in the world, and the Forbes magazine ranked me among the top 27 cardiologists in the United States. But I felt lonely, felt stressed, and had a heart attack at the age of 38 and a quadruple bypass at the age of 40. Now I'm going to tell you a few stories from my own clinical experience. I saw this lady a couple of years back during the COVID epidemic. She was dressed in black, in her 50s, and looked very sad. Her heart rate was very fast. And I asked her, "What's wrong? Why did you come and see me?" "Well, I heard about you, read about you, I Googled you." I said, "Well, tell me, are you having problem with your husband?" "No." "With your children?" "No." She says, "Well, I got a job taking care of an old elderly person. And I sat with him, fed him, we became friends. And suddenly I get a notice from the family, they fired me. And 3 days later, the old man, he was not that old, in his 70s, and he died. Guess what? Loneliness. He did not have a heart attack or a stroke. He was very lonesome. The family fired the lady because they were afraid she might give him COVID. Let me tell you another story. This is about a professor at UALR who was referred to me because he had very, very fast heart rate, atrial fibrillation. I listened to him, talked to him, we connected, and he was from India. He had a daughter who was about to get married. Well, one sin she committed and that bothered him, she was living with her boyfriend. It was unacceptable to this conservative Hindu professor from India. Well, just talking to him, he could not talk about these things with his wife, and he had no friends to talk to. Well, we connected, and the whole story is that, of course, I gave him some medications, and his atrial fibrillation receded, and the daughter got married, and now she has 2 children. So lonesomeness led to tremendous stress. Stress led to atrial fibrillation. Now let me tell you a third story. Again, my own contact, my own relationships. I have a neighbor who I used to see him frequently while mowing the lawn, working outside. I didn't see him for a few days. My son told me, read about him on Facebook, that he had a massive heart attack. He was at Baptist Hospital, went home, and out of friendship and neighborliness, I went, took a bunch of flowers, visited him. He was indifferent. His wife was indifferent too. And I told them, they knew I'm a cardiologist. I was chief of cardiology at that time at UAMS. They could contact me anytime they wish. Well, they haven't contacted me yet over the years. So this is the society we live in. People are very lonely in the West. That's what we think. And becoming very lonely in the developing countries. Studies have shown that people who feel or are lonely have more heart attacks and strokes and other diseases. We have learned that outcome after a heart attack is determined by hopefulness. How hopeful are you about your future? Number of supportive members and friends. not by the size of the dead heart muscle or number of diseased arteries. New York Times and other respected news media are now carrying articles on loneliness. Just in last 2 years, New York Times had a number of articles, and I'll just read you the titles of those articles. Do you have a best friend? How to make and keep friends in adulthood. Text your friends, it matters more than you think. We are in a loneliness crisis. Another reason to get off that phone. How loneliness is damaging your health. How many friends do you really need? And COVID has made us more lonely, as shown in my opening story. Now, let me tell you about the developing countries. And the countries now, this is according to New York Times, the highest proportion of people have become lonely. These countries are Turkey, Brazil, India, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Great Britain. Let me tell you about Great Britain. Again, it was a small story somewhere, and I'll pick it up later on. Over 40% of people over the age of 65 have had nobody to talk to in the last 6 months. Sweden tops the list when it comes to the loneliest country in the world. A new report suggests that 36% of all Americans, 61% of young adults, and 51% of mothers with young children feel serious loneliness. Not surprisingly, loneliness has increased substantially since the outbreak of the global epidemic, COVID. I don't know how many of you know, death rates in the United States have begun to increase in the last 2-3 years overall, not because of higher deaths among blacks or Hispanics. The increase is mostly in the 25 to 40 years old whites. It has been called deaths of despair. As I mentioned earlier, during COVID pandemic, heart attacks, strokes, and sudden death rates increased very substantially all over the country. Loneliness induces release of cortisol and catecholamines and other stress hormones, and thereby increases blood pressure and heart rate. Makes the blood cells sticky and causes clot formation. Let me tell you another research that was done in 1970s, and people have forgotten about it. A Harvard scientist, Dr. Herbert Benson, conducted an experiment in which monkeys were kept either in groups, as they would in their natural environment, or kept in isolation. All were given plenty of food. Those that were kept in isolation had severe irregularities of the heart, what we call arrhythmias, and they had more heart attacks. This was probably the first scientific study that showed that social isolation can have adverse effect on your cardiovascular system. A very famous study called the InterHeart, conducted in 29 different countries, showed that psychosocial stress was a more important risk factor in the development of heart attack, more important than diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, or lack of exercise. Let me tell you about the Harvard study of adult development. I don't know how many of you have heard about it. This has been recently discussed in New York Times and also on NPR last week. This is the longest study of adult life that has ever been done. 85-year continuous study. Lives of 724 men starting in 1938 were tracked. Year after year, asking about their work, their home, their lives, their health, and of course, asking all along the way without knowing how their life stories were going to turn out. Later on, some women were included too. And of course, the children and grandchildren of the original participants were included. What have we learned from this study? Well, the lessons are not about wealth or fame or working hard that determines how long you're going to live, how happy you're going to be. The clearest messages from this study are, number one, good relationships keep us happier and healthier, and the experience of loneliness turns out to be toxic. Second big lesson that we learned, that it is not just the number of friends you have, it is not whether or not you are in a committed relationship, but it's the quality of your close relationship that matters. It wasn't the cholesterol levels or the blood pressure levels that determined how they were going to grow, how we're going to live when they grow old. It was how satisfied they were in their relationships that determined their longevity and their quality of their life. The people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. The third big lesson that we learned about relationships and our health is that good relationships don't just protect our bodies, they protect our brains as well. So the messages are, we are living in a very stressful environment, especially in these United States, where hard work and accomplishment is thought to be the end-all of life. We are socially very isolated and very lonesome. Many diseases, especially the heart disease, are related to stress. Actually, we are investigating this phenomena in our lab. What I recommend for preventing and treating heart disease, things you all know, like control of risk factors like high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking cessation, take medications as recommended by your doctors. But there are some ways to handle stress and loneliness and possibly alter heart-brain connections. And these are my suggestions. Number one, take personal responsibility. Socialize with people, humans, not on social media. Eat right, preferably vegetarian diet. Exercise, connect with nature, sleep well, reduce or eliminate alcohol and cigarettes, meditation, as my dear wife suggested. Join and organize clubs. Book clubs, we have that. Laughing clubs. People get together and laugh, just for nothing. Can we all laugh? Let go. Walking clubs, cooking clubs, get together. Second, community responsibility. Help each other. People who help each other, others, are the happiest. People who focus on self, that I mentioned in the opening paragraph, are the most unhappy. Group support, especially in places of worship, like what we're doing now. Now let me tell you about a third thing that you may not have heard. The government can take some responsibility as well. In the 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, she did not have a good relationship with her husband, very stressful. And that's when they found that almost half the people in Great Britain were very lonely. So she established a ministry of lonesomeness. It still goes on. I don't know how many of you know that. Now there are government-regulated, funded ministries of lonesomeness or likewise, in Scandinavia, even in Saudi Arabia. People go, the government sends vans or trucks or cars, take elderly people who are very lonesome to clubs for food, dancing, getting together. It has made a big difference. There is a dramatic decline in heart attack rates among the elderly in Scandinavia. So the government can arrange town and city get-togethers. In North America, we have traveled quite a bit. One of the cities that I liked very much was Toronto. I don't know how many of you have been there. Every weekend, there are get-togethers in downtown, winter or warm weather, whatever. And there are people from all over the world there. Take elderly to community groups if you really want to help them. In my book, I mentioned maybe you should tell young children they will get some school credits if they go and take care of the elderly. Talk to them, walk with them, feed them. And mostly we should tell our congressmen to fund governmental agencies to take care of us. Thank you very much.
We've come to the end of the service, and as is our tradition, unfortunately, we need to extinguish this beautiful light from the chalice, and I will do that with Margot. We extinguish the chalice with these words from John Morgan. In the end, it won't matter how much we have. It won't matter how much we know, but rather how well we lived. And it won't matter how much we believe, but how deeply we love. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Amen. Blessed be. Namaste. Thank you. I think it was perfect.